Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for attending our event this evening to launch our impact report from the academic year 24-25. It's great to see so many kind of familiar faces, but also some new faces as well. And yeah, today we're going to be focusing on kind of looking back on what we achieved in academic year 24-25 and what's facing us as well. I'd like us to begin with something that we use a lot at Colisa that we call a check-in. So this is everything that we do. This fits everything that we do at Colisa, from our one-to-ones to our team meetings to our work with young people, and it all starts with a check-in, which is an opportunity to reflect on what we're feeling and what we're carrying in to the spaces that we show up in. We could be stressed about an upcoming deadline. We could have just forgotten to send an email, and we're firing it off and thinking about that. Or we might just be tired, probably hungry after a long day at work. But this practice allows us to acknowledge that and to acknowledge where we're at in our current state and to prepare us for whatever's required of us over the next few minutes. I'm not going to ask anyone to share, but I'd like to invite everyone to just pause now and check in with themselves to reflect on what they're bringing into the space. Okay, great. Now let's take a look at what we've got in store for today. So we're going to begin with a welcome, which we're very much getting towards the end of. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the report, which I'm going to run us through. And then we're going to move into our panel discussion, and we're joined by Dr. Carly Goldsmith from Impetus, Beth Smith from All Child, and Freya Robson. Thank you all from Football Beyond Borders. Thank you all so much for joining the event today and speaking for us. And then we've got our keynote address from Colisa's young influencers. We've got Callum and Nasrin, who are going to speak to us about their experience of some of the things that Colisa works on. And then we're going to finish just before 6 o'clock. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom. I'm the currently acting CEO at Colisa, but usually Director of Delivery and Operations. So I've been working with the team for the past year, delivering on our program and also all of the kind of supporting operations around the organization as well. And before we get into the report, we've actually got a bit of a surprise announcement today as well, which we thought we'd keep back as a bit of a Easter egg for everyone. And I'd like to introduce our new logo at Colisa. You might think that it's not a massively different logo, but what we've done is we've collaboratively developed a tagline to sit alongside our logo, which is nurturing well-being, shaping young futures, and unlocking potential. And it tells everyone exactly what we do. It puts young people right at the forefront of someone's first engagement with Colisa. And you'll be seeing this in all of our future communications. So please do look out for it. So a little sneak preview there of something brand new that the team have been working on. So thank you for everyone that inputted into that. And let's get started. Let's talk about the report. And I'd like to reiterate how heartwarming it is to see so many colleagues, partners, collaborators, and innovators attending the event this evening. Academic year 24-25 was a really turbulent year. We began to feel the effects of a changing government. Global events took centre stage. And it was an unprecedented period of challenge for the charity sector. Volunteering was down, giving was down, and the biggest number of winding down in charities since the 2008 financial crash. Internally, it was a big year of change for Colisa as well. We said a tearful goodbye to our CEO and embarked on a period of change in the organisation. So set against this backdrop, the successes that we're sharing today are even more impressive, and we're excited to mark these successes with today's event. With this week marking Children's Mental Health Week across the UK, it also feels like a particularly poignant time to reflect on our achievements and focus our sights on what the future could look like for young people's mental health and well-being. So for those of you who are new to Colisa and the work that we do, we're an organisation that delivers therapeutically informed well-being work programmes with young people who have a history of trauma or adverse childhood experiences. In mainstream secondary schools, we work as well. We're currently working in some of the most marginalised areas of Greater London and Greater Manchester. ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs can take many forms, from experiencing bereavement to being a victim of prejudice to facing violence or adversity at home, and are affecting young people up and down the country today, with 48% of young people having experienced at least one ACE in their childhood. These experiences are directly linked to challenges in adolescent and adult life, with young people with a history of ACEs being 3 times more likely to become NEET, not in education, employment or training, 4 times more likely to have low levels of mental well-being and life satisfaction, 7 times more likely to be involved in violence, and 11 times more likely to be incarcerated. Young people are recommended for our programme because their history of trauma is playing out in their behaviour in school, a direct indicator that a young person has experienced trauma and is on course to face the challenges that I've just spoken about. Every school day in the UK, 57 young people are permanently excluded, and this has increased by 16% over the past year. There's a strong pathway from exclusion to incarceration. Nearly 75% of young people who received custodial sentences have previously been excluded from school. This picture is exacerbated when traditional measures of disadvantage are factored in, with children on free school meals being 6 times more likely to be permanently excluded than their peers. So the challenge is big, and it's only getting bigger. And this is why the work that Khalisa does the work that we do with young people, targeting young people who are eligible for free school meals and pupil premium, who have a known history of ACEs, or whose behaviour would suggest that they are communicating the need to participate in our programme. So in academic year 24-25, 63% of Khalisa's young people were eligible for free school meals, against a national average of 26%, with 1/3 of the young people on our programmes being flagged as having already been excluded or being at risk of exclusion from school. We work primarily with year 9s, which is a key intervention year before young people begin studying for their GCSEs in earnest, with 90% of excluded pupils not achieving a pass in GCSE maths or English. We estimate that without our support, only 1% of the young people on our programme would achieve 5 good GCSE grades, which is a benchmark widely accepted to be the point at which a young person can progress into further education or training. Academic year 24-25 saw a further transition, Khalisa, as we rolled out en masse our latest iteration of the programme model, which saw us double the amount of contact time young people have with our facilitators, from an average of 8 hours to an average of 16 hours. And alongside that, we added support for parents and carers through our trauma nurturing connections program and our school and support staff on our trauma training program. Widening and deepening our impact is something that we felt we needed to do to better support the schools and communities we serve. It's important that we don't expect change from the young people participating in our program without also identifying the ways in which the environments around them can change. And the reason that we're so proud to talk about the program and the work that we do is because it works. Our program's providing targeted support in areas that participants most need it, and we measure our outcomes against national benchmarks for well-being, resilience, and emotional regulation. We then survey young people against validated scales both before and after they participate in our program. So we're really confident in the robustness of our data. Against these validated benchmarks, in all areas, young people join the FACEIT program below the national average and leave the program above the national average. So that's in well-being, resilience, and emotional regulation. Young people are coming to us below national average and leaving us above national average. And these are against validated benchmark scales. So we're incredibly proud of that and incredibly proud to talk about it. So with the intensive and targeted nature of the work we do throughout the FACEIT program, we're able to change the narrative for the way our young people relate to themselves and engage with school. To look a bit deeper into the stats, in 24-25, young people experienced a 9% increase in average wellbeing scores, up 4 percentage points compared to 23-24. alongside an 8% increase in average resilience and emotional regulation scores. And not only are young people experiencing these uplifts in these outcomes, but they're also using the skills that they develop on the program. 90% of the young people that we're working with are using the skills that they developed on the program in their everyday school life. And 82% are reporting a stronger sense of belonging and connection with their peers as a direct result of participating in the FACEIT program. We're also seeing changes in behaviour because of participation in the program. With help from our friends at Impact Ed, we were able to pull data directly from school management information systems, which show a 26% reduction in negative behaviour points and a 33% reduction in exclusions for FACEIT alumni. This year, we'll be building on these findings to show how our young people fare against their peers in all of the outcomes mentioned above. So yes, academic year 24-25 was a year fraught with challenge and turbulence. It was an incredibly difficult year, both for Khalisa and for the wider sector. But we're proud to say that we faced these challenges and delivered our most successful year of outcomes-based impact to date. This year, we're looking to build on our achievements and work with more young people to change the narratives of their lives and keep facing it together. And it gives me real pleasure to launch Khalisa's annual impact report today. And you can find a copy of the report via the QR code there for further reading. Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Sophie, who is chairing our discussion panel today. Thank you very much, Sophie. Over to you.
Thank you, Tom. And yeah, it's lovely to see so many of you virtually with us this evening. Thank you to everybody for joining us. I am Sophie and I am Head of Fundraising at Khalisa. And I am delighted this evening to be joined by our three fantastic panellists, who I am just going to ask to very briefly introduce themselves, if that's okay. If we could just go on the order on the screen. So Carly, would you mind just introducing yourself first?
Yeah, of course. Evening, everybody. I'm Carly Goldsmith and I'm Senior Policy Advisor at Impetus, where I lead on our policy work on school engagement, which is around absence, exclusion, suspension. And I clearly like this jumper because I'm wearing it and I've got it on in the photo, but that wasn't deliberate. It was an accident.
Thank you, Carly. Beth, over to you.
Evening, everyone. Delighted to be here. My name is Beth and I am Head of Programme Design at All Child. So we're an early intervention charity working in schools. We place link workers who are trusted adults in schools to deliver 2-year programmes with young people. And my role is designing a programme that is grounded in evidence and delivers meaningful outcomes for children and young people.
Thank you, Beth. And finally, Freya.
Thanks, Sophie. Great to hear about your impact report, by the way. Really good impact. I'm a Senior Impact Manager at Football Beyond Borders. So we work with young people who are disengaged in school, particularly those at risk of exclusion, in order to support them to finish school with the skills and grades they need to successfully transition into adulthood. And before I was at FBB, I was also at Impact Ed and worked with Khalisa on some of the things that Tom was talking about earlier. So it's really nice to kind of be back full circle and yeah, be joining you all again.
Great, thank you so much, Freya. And yeah, really lovely to hear such a kind of range of experience with young people in the sector. So we're going to get straight into it. So I'd love to hear from the three of you a bit about your experiences of how lost learning and disrupted schooling have impacted young people's confidence, motivation and long-term prospects. And what do you think are the most urgent steps that schools and communities can take to address this? So Carly, I'm going to come to you first for your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Here at Impetus, we are lucky enough to be able to invest in doing research in this area. And I think the thing that I can probably contribute the most is a sense of, you know, what happens to young people through the life course. And obviously at the top of the session today, we talked a lot about young people kind of ending up in the criminal justice system. But there are a range of other ways in which like losing learning impacts upon young people's opportunities, both when they are at school, but also then when they move into being young adults. So we did some research with EPI around suspensions and the impact of suspensions. And you know, one of the things that we found was, you know, suspensions and being suspended at school has an impact at school. So you're more likely, if you're multiply suspended, to be behind your peers when it comes to getting GCSE in English and maths. And this is a real issue because we know that suspensions have more than doubled since the pandemic, and actually they are kind of stubbornly high. And we know that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, the kind of group that Impetus really works kind of on behalf to support, are really affected by that. And so not only do they affect young people's kind of ability to get those GCSEs and qualifications that we know they need in order to kind of move on to the next stage in their life and maintain those choices, suspensions, the impact of suspensions kind of continues through the life course. So young people who are multiply suspended are much less likely to go on, for example, to university. They're much more likely to not be earning or learning in young adulthood. They're significantly more likely in adulthood to be receiving out of work kind of health related benefits. So we know that lost learning really does cast quite a long shadow over the lives of young people, and particularly those young people who are most at risk of it. I really like the way that you talked about that kind of relationship with attendance in the report, but I think, and the way you spoke about exclusions at the top of the hour, suspensions are a huge issue. There's just under 1 million suspensions last year. So this is a really kind of significant issue that we need to address.
Yes, thank you, Carly. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right there. And that kind of cycle that it creates of young people losing learning and then the subsequent opportunities. And I like that phrase, kind of casting a long shadow. And it means, we're not just talking about the impact on young people, we're talking about that kind of lifelong impact that we're seeing. Freya, I'd love from kind of your experience at Football Beyond Borders. I know you kind of target young people that have faced particular challenges as well. Kind of what are the challenges that you're seeing for young people in this area?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, we focus a lot on young people who are at risk of exclusion, and I've lost my words. Usually, like, they're young people who have been suspended multiple times, as Carly was saying, and that all like automatically sort of reduces their likelihood of actually having those long-term outcomes. A lot of people, when they think of lost term learning, especially those less familiar with the sector, immediately think of their academic outcomes, right? And think of, okay, they're losing learning, they're not going to reach their academic potential. But actually, I kind of think that as more of a secondary impact. And what we see first is actually that lower confidence, that lower self-esteem, that loss of trust and psychological safety around the school environment and everything and everyone associated with it. So young people really start to internalise, when they haven't been in school for a long period of time, this message around school isn't for them, or they're falling behind, or they're just seen as a problem there. And it's really that loss of belonging that really damages long-term prospects. And it also impacts some young people more than others. So those who are already at risk of exclusion, or who have SEN, for example. So it's really widening the disadvantage gap even further than what it already is. And in terms of steps kind of needs to address it, we want to be thinking about what is it that makes school a psychological safe place for young people, that makes them feel that sense of belonging. And this is where the importance of trusted adults, from relationships, really comes into play. So because belonging, it's a relational concept. So for young people to feel like they belong in school, they need a trusted adult who they know believes in them, is there for them, is a role model to them. And this is something that I think, the FACE IT programme, FEB's programme, a lot of these programmes are really built on these foundations. It's about providing that trusted adult that's going to be their stabilising force outside of the family home, so that when that young person does go into school, or they do reintegrate into school after suspension, for example, there's going to be that trusted adult in their corner, and the impact that can have can be huge for a young person, especially on their social and emotional skills. If they know they have that trusted adult in their corner at that school, they're less likely to become dysregulated, and that's less likely to then spiral into disengagement, or result in more behaviour points, or result in more suspensions, or result in a managed move or permanent exclusion. And so, yeah, I think for us, it's really about building that sense of belonging and that trusted adult relationship, and really giving them that stabilising force to kind of give them the chance they need to thrive.
Thank you, Freya. And yeah, I think completely, you're so right to flag that importance of, we're not just talking about attainment and those sort of educational outcomes. We're looking more widely about how do we want our young people to feel in themselves, and those sort of trusted relationships are right at the core of that. Beth, I'd be really interested from your experience at All Child, what have you kind of seen in terms of that role of kind of trusted adults, those wider outcomes, and perhaps the impact of sort of lost learning on those outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with Freya, the importance of kind of trusted adult being at the centre of any kind of support for young people. I think one of the biggest mistakes we make when we talk about sort of attendance, loss learning, exclusions is seeing that as the issue itself, when in reality it's a symptom of other unmet needs that are often kind of overlapping and quite complex. So I think it's really important that we don't have a kind of one size fits all approach. Interventions that are kind of solely focused on driving up attendance or exclusions or punitive approaches like sanctions, we know they don't work, they're not effective. What works is early, holistic, relationship-based support, which is what Freya was talking to. So just to kind of add two things onto that, I suppose, what we see at All Child is yes, trusted relationships being at the centre of any kind of approach, in that they can support in identifying what those underlying needs might be and ensure the right support comes in place. But alongside that, early identification and intervention, the earlier we can identify who these young people are that are struggling and act on those challenges, the more we can kind of reduce the chances of those problems becoming entrenched. And then the second point is sort of around joined up, tailored support. We know children are often missing school because early intervention services are limited and crisis services are overstretched. So children and families are falling through the gaps, and then that's putting pressure on schools to fill gaps where they're not adequately funded or don't have the specialist capacity to do, which again increases the kind of disengagement from children and families. So what really works is when schools, mental health services, family support and community organisations are connected and work together, and children and families have a trusted adult to help them navigate that system, so that support is tailored to what children and families really need to support them to kind of better engage back into school.
Thank you, Beth. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and it's great to kind of hear the alignment from what Tom was talking about that Kalisa's doing, and all three of you very much kind of on the same page there. I think it shows the evidence is sort of really pointing in similar directions. Freya, I'm just going to come back to you, and I'd love to kind of pick up on what you were talking about that kind of trusted adult being at the core of what it is that Football Beyond Borders does. And I'd love to understand a bit more about, with youth mental health challenges rising, what is it, do you think, that Football Beyond Borders, and what kind of else are you seeing that's proving to be really effective in supporting the well-being of young people who are facing disadvantage or perhaps at risk of exclusion or suspension?
I think what I think helps with proves the most effective support when it comes to young people is having something that isn't opt into. So something that's already there, something that's built into their week, something that's delivered by someone they trust, and is a consistency in their life. When young people are facing disadvantages, they're less likely, or they're the ones who are least likely to be able to access formal mental health services. So whether that be through stigma or different thresholds, or 5 to 10 year waiting lists, things like that. For young people to access mental health support when it's opt-in service, it can be incredibly difficult and time consuming, and in itself really mentally detrimental. On the other hand, programs like the FBB program and also Kalisa's program, relational based models, they're more likely to catch issues early. So as Beth was saying, that preventative kind of before it reaches crisis point, being able to identify those young people early before they need that intervention. As I said before, FBB is a long-term program, so we work with young people from year 8 to year 11, so we're a 4-year program. And we identify young people who are at risk of exclusion from the start of that programme, and they're in year 8. And we continue to work with them on the FBB journey, even if, say, after a year on the programme, if you were to newly meet that young person, they wouldn't be presenting as at risk, because ultimately at some point in their life, they've been identified as at risk. And if we're suddenly to remove that support, that's been their consistency, that's been their source of psychological safety in the school environment, we would be removing that preventative trusted adult relationship, and it would become much more easier for that young person to hit crisis point and rapidly decline in their ability to regulate, and ultimately make them at even greater risk of exclusion than what they initially were. So yeah, again, bringing it back, I feel like I sound like a broken record, but bringing it back to that trusted adult relationship and that grounding stability that is driving force behind the psychological safety and mental well-being, I think is so important. And also that holistic support around not only working with the young people themselves, but also the people around them, and modelling the relationships with the people around them. So modelling, the adult who, the FBB practitioner, for example, who's working with the young person, showing that that person has a good relationship with the teacher. And so it's possible to have a good relationship with the teacher. And also with parental engagement, and really kind of building that holistic support system that's structurally sound around the child, to really, really support them and hold them. and kind of reduce that risk of them, as I say, reaching that crisis point and reaching that rapid decline into dysregulation.
Do you mind if I jump in as well? Just to follow
please
up
do,
with
Carly.
that, Freya. I know you wanted this to be kind of more of a discussion. I think that you know, you just hit upon the kind of wider school environment, and I think we're probably going to talk about the kind of bigger structural issues that we think and systemic changes that need to happen kind of in policy at a later point in our discussion. But I think we did some research with 60 young people in year 10 last year on specifically asking their views on attendance, and they were very clear actually how important the school environment was and what are the changes that we need to make there in order to kind of support young people to just be in an emotionally healthier place and to actually enjoy school. And they talked to us about, yes, you know, the importance of having a trusted adult and the importance of relationships. And I really want to echo that. It's like relationships are really the key to this. But they also talked to us about, you know, relationships with their friends as well, and having more space for social connection. I mean, I don't think a lot of us that would have gone to school, I went to school a long time ago, but really understand the ways in which opportunities to socialise at school have really narrowed, because lunch times have got shorter, break times have got shorter, enrichment has kind of really been marginalised in the curriculum. So, you know, behaviour policies often kind of create a sort of stricter environment that young people are walking around schools in. So there are opportunities to just talk in corridors or just have those social moments that are really important when, you know, you're growing up, really have been sort of narrowed. Also, the other thing about like needing schools that have meaning beyond exams. You know, I know we've talked about kind of exams and them not being the only outcome that we want to drive towards, and that is absolutely, yes, from an IMTAS perspective, like we really support young people kind of doing well in their exams. We know how that has a positive impact, but actually it's not just about exams. You know, it is about that kind of broader, holistic kind of curriculum that you can offer young people in the school setting. The other thing they said that they really wanted actually was for schools to take wellbeing seriously. And I'm sure if you spoke to most school leaders around the country, they would absolutely insist that they're taking wellbeing seriously. But actually, it's young people feeling like they want teachers who are trained to be able to kind of listen sensitively when emotional, you know, when there are kind of emotional concerns that a young person might have, that they know as alongside potentially a trusted adult, that all teachers, you know, all school staff are able to really kind of, you know, accept actually that for some young people, or for many young people actually, they are going to need somebody that they can talk to and confide in, and that can be handled sensitively. So that wider school environment and the sort of context in which young people are growing up at school are really important for us to consider.
Just
thank you, Beth.
I just add to that as well. Yeah, I was nodding away because like that's something we hear a lot from the young people that we work with as well, around Carly's point in particular, around sort of more opportunities for success for young people. So much of it is hinged on academic success, and that's where we see that kind of cycle of disengagement continuing, right? If you fall behind academically, you lose motivation and confidence. Whereas if we provide young people with broader opportunities for success, be it sport, like the FIBIDAs, or music, or drama, or art, there's kind of more opportunities to engage. But also, going back to the kind of original question around effective support strategies for mental health, we know that mental health looks different for every young person, and some young people are struggling with a probable or diagnosable mental health disorder, but other young people are struggling with peer relationships, like Carly was talking about, and bringing them together in groups, or others are struggling with perhaps confidence, and joining a drama club can really kind of support them to do that. So it boosts engagement, but it also kind of supports young people to build these sort of protective factors that increase resilience and motivation and engagement over time. So yeah, hard agree with everything everyone said. It's really important.
Thank you so much. And I think if we try and perhaps zoom out a little bit, and if we think kind of beyond just the school's experience, and this is a really kind of big question, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts, you know, where do we think that social and emotional learning can add the most value? You know, where can this be better embedded, whether that's within education, youth services? How do we think at a more kind of systemic level that we can really drive that lasting impact for young people? Beth, can I come to you first on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Something we think a lot about, and I know others across the sector do as well. And I think social emotional learning is best when it's not abstract and it's not one-off. It's woven into young people's, their relationships, their routines, their experiences. So for us and for others on the call, I'm sure it means delivered in schools or in youth settings is really key, because it's then not removed from that young person's everyday life. I think support that is led by adults that young people can relate to people who can understand and connect with their world. And I think we've touched on this as well, but sort of offers young people different ways to engage, not always one-to-one, sometimes groups, different kind of methods through sport, drama, mentoring, not kind of just talking. And I think where we see it most effective is where there is that trusted adult within the school. So a young person may attend a specialist intervention, perhaps from a psychologist, and gain a huge amount of skills from it, but it's their link worker, their trusted adult in school, who is helping those skills stick. They're reinforcing those strategies, they're supporting them in real moments when they come up with their peers and reminding them of the techniques that they've learnt. And that I think is where we see the impact of kind of interventions being sustained over time, where it's kind of practiced and made into routine in schools.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you, Beth. Freya, how do you feel about that? Kind of, what have you seen work, and how do we think that could be kind of zoomed out at that bigger, more systemic level?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything Beth just said in terms of, it's no use having an SEL classroom session where you teach about teamwork and then the next week you teach about something else and you forget teamwork until it comes round in the next year when you teach it again. It's a case of it's best learned when it's a lived experience, when it's learning those real relationships, when it's learning those real situations. I think on a systemic level, it's sort of around making sure that it's more systemic practice rather than reactive practice, and those relational guarantees, and rather than reactive systems as well. And if you're talking about equity, it's not just about services, it's about guaranteeing those relationships. And the government announced back in December about the trusted adult guarantee, ensuring 500,000 young people have access to a trusted adult over the next 10 years, and not just doing that through existing trusted adults, but also by training up youth workers, by coaches, other trusted adults like pastoral staff throughout the school and throughout a young person's life, to actually kind of guide them through that and actually make sure that, as Beth said, it is being woven into their everyday life and it is being practiced in their peer relationships. I think something that Carly and Beth were talking about earlier in terms of those peer relationships and sort of those kind of opportunities for young people to interact with other young people around the school environment are incredibly limited. And we're also in a really unique position where it's been decades since an entire generation has experienced a shared adverse childhood experience, right? Like, it's been 5-6 years since we went through a pandemic. And if you were to look at an individual young person, if they were just to experience that themselves, they would still have their peers to lean on, as well as these trusted adult relationships around them. But at the moment, we've got a scenario where every single young person can't lean on another young person who has not had that experience and has not been affected by that and can't have that peer support in place. And so we've got to rely on these trusted adult relationships, even though the adults themselves obviously live through it, to actually build that holistic support system around them to, support the young people. Yeah.
I think just to add to that, I think sometimes it's really important for us to always think about, and I know we all do in terms of the work that we do, but like those young people who are furthest away from accessing a kind of SEL intervention or SEL support or a SEL programme, how do we know, one of the things, I don't know if any of you saw the Joseph Rowntree Foundation poverty report that was published a couple of weeks ago, or maybe it was last week, but we know that young people and families who are living in poverty have been living in poverty for very long periods of time. And we know that that is going to have had an impact on their ability to access some of this stuff. So who's not in the classroom? Who's not in school? Where else? And I know this is why kind of youth work and the sort of rebuilding of youth work is so important. But who is not in a youth club? Like where are those young people actually that are probably most in need of that support? And how do we provide an offer for them? And I think that that's something like always for us at Impetus. It's like, who are the young people furthest away from this, and actually what bridges do they need? What steps do we need to take them through in order for them to be able to access that support in an equitable way?
And I think that's something that's really challenging as well, because it all also comes down to a shared understanding of what a trusted adult is, not just amongst sort of the adults in terms of the schools and the education organisations and the policymakers and that, but also what a young person believes a trusted adult is. They can think this adult is the person I trust, this is the person I'd go to for all my life advice, but actually that's not a safe adult to go to, and they don't have the ability to recognise that. And it's the case of then, like, how do we identify that in the first place, right? Like, how do we reach them enough to identify it, to then do an intervention and actually support them?
Yeah, thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap up our panel discussion there, but oh my gosh, I feel like I could listen to you three talk all evening. I feel like there's the beginning of a good podcast there. But I think there's some really kind of inspiring call to actions there for us to think about, the gaps in provision, making sure that we are really meeting the most disadvantaged young people where they're at, making sure that provision is really sustained, that we are there providing long-term support. These trusted adults, I think if there's kind of one thing we can all come away with, it's that recognition of how vitally important that commitment to have trusted adults with the right skills that are there, and giving opportunities for young people to build relationships with those trusted adults, with each other, and kind of having the skills and the opportunities to do that. So lots of food for thought there, and I think really the kind of the beginning of a conversation about how we can all be part of making a difference and making things better for young people. So a huge thank you, Carly, Beth and Freya. Really grateful for you joining us this evening, and I will pass back to Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Really, really insightful discussion. Let's get one of those kind of virtual round of applauses going for Sophie and our panelists. It was an incredible discussion. I had to turn my camera off because I was nodding along like the Churchill dog a bit too much, and I didn't want to distract from the discussion. But definitely the beginnings of a conversation. And thank you again, everyone, for your insights and your time. So we're moving on now to hear from the young people that we're talking about. It gives me real pleasure to introduce Nasrin and Callum, who are two of Kalisa's young influencers who are going to deliver our keynote address. So over to you, Nasrin and Callum.
Hi, I'm Nasrin. I'm 18 and I'm currently on a gap year. I've been working alongside Kalisa since October 2024 as a young influencer. And since then, I've done a couple of interviews with other young influencers and the Kalisa team. And I have also had many opportunities to discuss the importance of youth voice and why it's needed in decision making and policy changes. And in the future, I see myself working towards becoming a nurse or just having a role in my community where I help people.
Hello everyone, my name's Callum and I'm one of the young influencers here at Kalisa. Like Nasrin, my role is to ensure that Kalisa's support and the foundation that Kalisa builds from is actually co-designed with young people and not just consulted on. And so we work as young influencers to ensure that this happens. So I'm really fortunate to be speaking with you today.
Thank you for that, Callum. And so now we're just here to speak about how well-being looks for us as young people and how youth voice is essential in spaces like these. So when we speak about the well-being crisis in secondary schools and colleges, we're not talking about a single isolated problem. We're talking about thousands of young people, each struggling in their own way. For some, it's fear of coming into school. For others, it's anxiety about academic pressure. For many, it's difficulties with friendships and family dynamics. And for even more, it's a combination of all these factors and more. Low well-being doesn't look the same for every young person, but these challenges, amongst many others, are driving the rise in school avoidance and seemingly disruptive behavior that can quickly spiral out of control when teachers and school staff are asked to take on multiple roles within schools. What if we stopped viewing behavior as challenging and started viewing it as communication of unmet needs? Over time, if these challenges go unnoticed or unsupported, it starts to take a deeper toll on young people. They slowly start to disengage from their learning, lose confidence in themselves, and feel increasingly isolated from their peers. This can develop into persistent school avoidance, low self-esteem, patterns of behavior that reflect the stress they're carrying, or they just simply stay silent. And this is a reality for students going through periods of crisis in their lives. Many believe that they're completely alone and seeking support won't change anything, even when teachers say they're available to have a chat. It can feel like being in a bubble. You're surrounded by many, yet feel distant from them all. Students begin to internalize that school really isn't for them, that it's not worth trying anymore, and that's worrying. These beliefs don't just stay in childhood, they can follow young people into adulthood, shaping their mental health, their future relationships, and the opportunities they feel able to pursue. And this is how trauma is manifesting in schools and communities up and down the country. There are a lot of people who I know personally in the past that have struggled with their mental health while struggling in school, and I myself have been one of those people. I wasn't really much of a school avoider, but I was feeling really burnt out every day after school during sixth form, and I had to force myself to revise and do homework because I knew if I didn't, my teachers would give me a detention, or I would just have to hear another lecture about the effort you put in now into your work will show on results day. And it honestly made me unconsciously not want to do the work, even because even though I was doing my best at that time, it just felt like it wasn't going to be enough. But it doesn't have to be this way though. When young people feel seen and genuinely understood, that is when things can slowly start changing. Every person deserves to feel like they belong and that they matter. The well-being crisis isn't just a challenge for schools, but it's also a call to action for all of us. We can help them slowly rebuild confidence, reconnect with learning, and see a future that feels possible again. Every young person deserves that. School shouldn't feel like the end of the world. Instead, it should be a fun and exciting experience.
Thank you so much, Nazrin, for that. I just want to say, like Nazrin has, a genuine thank you to Kalisa for putting young people central in rooms like this and treating our experiences with compassion and interest. What I do really respect most is the principle behind it. It's not just consultation where young people are asked for the quote at the end, but it is actually genuine and meaningful co-design where young people help shape Kalisa's systems from the start. As it is now, we're speaking to you in a keynote address. That's a testament to Kalisa's values. I always say that an organisation that works for young people should have young people at the forefront of everything. Designing, delivering and evaluating. Because if you build support without us, you usually build something we can't or won't access to the fullest extent. For young people, this well-being crisis, as we call it, isn't just something we actually hear about. It's something we're living day to day. It's waking up already feeling tense and using all of your energy just to stay regulated. And once you're spending your energy on coping, there's less left for learning, friendships, or for planning our futures. Now, that's why, as you've discussed in the panel discussion, that's why attendance matters so much, not just as a number, but it's also a signal. For a lot of young people, the first thing that drops when mental health drops is consistency. Getting in, staying in, coping in lessons, keeping up with deadlines. Nationally, the scale is enormous. In England in 23-24, nearly 1 in 5 pupils were persistently absent. That is not just a small group of young people opting out by choice. That is a real message to the system in the way it is. It's simply not working. And the impact can show up suddenly. A young person can be coping one day and then they hit a point where the demand is bigger than their capacity and everything changes. Attendance drops, concentration goes, and then school stops feeling manageable. Some young people go quiet and withdraw from their surroundings. Some keep going on the surface until it catches up with them. Others externalize, and unfortunately you see anger and refusal, and then even disruption. And the response becomes punishment rather than support. From the outside, it can look like bad behavior, but actually it's often panic, shame, overstimulation, or simply not having the words to say, I'm not coping. It also hits differently depending on what young people are carrying outside of school. If their family is under financial pressure, if they're caring for someone, if relations are unstable, if they're moving between places, their mental health has more weight on it from the start. And then locality stacks on top of that. The support you get depends on where you live, and that again is simply not good enough. Now, this is why Kalisa is so vital in schools and communities. Kalisa doesn't just work with the behaviour side. It supports young people to explore what sits underneath emotional stress, and it builds the adults and the environments around them too. Kalisa delivers intensive therapeutic group programs for young people and trains professionals, parents and carers to create nurturing, trauma-informed environments. In schools specifically, Kalisa's whole school approach is designed to support leadership, staff, parents and carers and students, because you can't ask one young person to be resilient inside a system that does not feel safe or consistent. But even the best program can't carry this alone. Young people experience systems that are broken. If we want to support young people properly, schools, mental health services, youth services, local authorities, family and community organisations have to act like one team, with simple pathways, shared understanding and quicker access to help before it becomes crisis level. That means warm handovers and not just tokenistic signposting for a young person. And none of it works without working with young people properly. Co-design isn't just a nice add-on that organisations get to say, you know, we've got this, but rather it is the difference between a service that actually looks good on paper and one that actually young people will find really helpful. Consultation asks young people to speak, whereas co-design gives young people the power to change things, and that is how you build trust for young people. Finally, support cannot be a one-size-fits-all approach. Two young people that can both be not attending school for completely different reasons: anxiety, bullying, trauma, neurodiversity, caring responsibilities, or poverty. A rigid approach might feel fair, but it won't be equal in impact, and this is so important. This is how equality works and not equity, and that approach is ineffective. Inclusion looks like relational behaviour policies and support that meets the reality of young people's lives. Mental health and well-being is the difference between coping and collapsing, and that difference decides everything: attendance, learning, and what comes next for a young person's future. If we do co-design with young people and we join services up and make support genuinely reachable, we stop losing people through the cracks and start widening futures. And that's exactly why Kalisa matters. It brings therapeutic support into schools and communities and helps the adults around young people respond with understanding, consistency and care. Nasrin and I, as we've said before, really appreciate being in a room where youth voice is treated as meaningful and impactful, and where what we can share can genuinely shape what happens next. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nasrin and Callum. And yeah, let's keep those virtual applause coming, because I think that so many of the themes in that keynote address are themes that we've been discussing, but also so many things for us to ponder as well, things for us to consider. I think particularly that consideration around joined up approaches and the way that we can work together as organisations, as institutions as well, and to provide that more holistic service to reach those harder to reach young people and provide a more comprehensive cover, I think is something for us to take away. And thank you for taking the time as well for delivering the keynote address today. Very, very informative and engaging. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our event today. And I'd just like to basically reel off a long list of thank yous again. So again, thank you to our young influencers for delivering our keynote address. Thank you for all of our panelists for taking the time out of their Wednesday evening to come and speak to us today. And thank you to everyone in the Kalisa team who has made this event happen. So Sophie for hosting the event, for hosting the panel today, and our communications and events coordinator, Ty, for putting everything together. It's been great to see so many attendees as well. So thank you all for coming today and taking the time out of your Wednesday evening to hear from us. If you have any further kind of thoughts, you want to hear more about what we do, or if you have any questions about anything that we've discussed today, you can find resources on our website, but also do get in touch with us. We've got info@Kalisa there, so do please get in touch. And again, please take a look at our impact report. Go and have a look at the things that are in there. And if you're interested in any of the things that we're doing, then do reach out. We're always keen to talk more about everything that we're doing, because I hope that this has come across. We're doing it pretty well. But the scale of the challenge is getting bigger, and we want to keep growing with it and keep improving our impact and deepening our impact as well. Thank you everyone for coming. Have a lovely rest of your evening, and hope to see you all very soon.